Yeah, I don't have my notes. We'll just go with it. Exodus chapter 4. Exodus chapter 4. We read a little bit of this last week, and I guess maybe we can wait a little bit. Wait about 20 seconds. We'll wait now. Okay. Exodus 4. We'll start from the beginning and read through verse 13. I'm okay, thanks. Exodus 4, beginning in verse 1, reading through verse 13. Then Moses said, "What if they will not believe me or listen to what I say? For they may say, the Lord has not appeared to you." The Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" And he said, "A staff." Then he said, "Throw it on the ground." So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses fled from it. But the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand and grasp it by its tail." So he stretched out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. That they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. And the Lord furthermore said to him, "Now put your hand into your bosom." So he put his hand into his bosom, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. And then he said, "Put your hand into your bosom again." And he put his hand into his bosom again, and when he took it out of his bosom, behold, it was restored like that, like the rest of his flesh. If they will not believe you or heed the witness of the first sign, they may believe the witness of the last sign. But if they will not believe even these two signs or heed what you say, then you shall pour some water from the Nile, or take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. And the water which you take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. Then Moses said to the Lord, "Please, Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither recently nor in time past, nor since you have spoken to your servant, for I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." The Lord said, "Who has made man's mouth, and who makes him mute or deaf, or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now then go, and I, even I, will be with your mouth, and teach you what you are to say." But he said, "Please, Lord, now send the message by whomever you will." Okay, what do you think?
Sounds like those people that are always wanting some kind of a sign. He had the burning bush, he's got the serpent, he's got the leprosy, and all the things, and he's still hesitant. I wonder, I mean, he grew up, and I always thought of him as being like a holy person. He grew up in a place where they were worshiping, calves and stuff like that, and idols.
Okay.
And stuff, and I see him being more maybe kind of fearful and kind of like a little bit, I mean, here, all this is happening to me, and I stick my hand in here, and it's like, this is for real. And kind of as it goes on, this is how the children of Israel kind of have to have the same kind of signs too. I mean, there's Pharaoh having the signs, but some of the signs were also for the children of Israel too. Because I don't know that I guess I don't know what kind of relationship they really had in their mind or in their heart or whatever after they had been in captivity for so long. And I mean, they could look back and know something about Abraham and stuff. That was a long time ago. I don't know. I don't know if Moses was really anybody else than somebody off the street. God picked. He said, you can do this. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
No, it's an interesting way to look at it. In fact, in some ways, you could say Moses is the perfect candidate because he has already intervened on behalf of the life of a Hebrew at a significant personal risk, that he grew up in the house of Pharaoh, and yet he's very much aware of his Hebrew roots. On the other hand, the fact that he murdered an Egyptian, from at least some perspective, it would be fair to say he was a murderer. That's how Pharaoh saw him, anyway. The Pharaoh that ran him off, not the Pharaoh he will go encounter. There's different ways of looking at that. He's an unlikely candidate, and then at the same time, maybe you can look at it and say he's the perfect candidate. And I guess between the two of those is he's as good as anyone. That's kind of what you're saying. I think is that he's as good, but maybe no better than anyone else. He's just the one the Lord has called, and I think that's a particular theme in a lot of the people God calls. He calls whom he calls, and it's we've said it a few times in this series. He doesn't call the qualified; he qualifies the called. So it's kind of however you want to look at it. I think I want to start with one thing you pointed out, or one thing you said, which was that Moses keeps asking for signs. Does Moses ask for signs?
Well,
He's given signs, yes. Maybe perhaps God is looking into his heart and seeing that Moses needs signs. But signs are usually to remove doubt, to confirm faith, to show that God is genuinely with someone. Moses isn't questioning any of that, though, is he?
Well, it's in the first chapter 4, it says, what if they do not believe me or listen to me? And they say that the Lord did not appear to you. And so he's kind of asking for a little help there. What if they don't believe?
Okay, that is not a sign that he doubts God, though, is it?
Oh, okay, no, right.
And we talked a little bit, I think, about this. We alluded to this somewhat last week. I think it's kind of hard for me to remember getting on up there in years. But, in verse 18 of chapter 3, God says, they will pay heed to what you say. God gives him that assurance.
Moses is scared. The Israelites said, you're going to kill me like you did the Egyptians. And of course, the Egyptians are mad at him for killing one of theirs. And so he's a little bit scared, as well as not feeling like he's eloquent enough.
Okay.
Why did you pick me?
Let's go back to the point you're having, though, that he asked for signs. And then PD's follow-up is he's wondering if, there's going to be doubt. And there will be doubt. But the doubt, or the questioning of doubt, is not either in the heart of Moses or that he questions God's ability to do it. Even God, in our reading, as we come down here, God says, if they will not believe you, they may believe this witness of the second sign. And if they don't believe either one of those, here's a third sign you'll do. God has 3 contingency plans for doubt. He said they will not have. They will pay heed to you. They will listen to what you say. Now, you can say that is eventually they will, okay? But that's not really how it's qualified in chapter 3, verse 18. It's like they're going to believe you. You're going to go down there, you're going to speak to them, and they're going to believe you. Moses says, what if they don't believe me? And God doesn't say, that's a stupid thing to say, Moses. The eloquence kind of is what God's response is. That's a stupid thing to say, Moses. I gave you your tongue. I'll be working it. You'll be fine. But this question is a doubt or a fear that Moses has, not in God, but in his fellow Hebrews, in his brothers and sisters in faith. What if they don't listen to me? What if they doubt my word when I say the Lord has appeared to me? And instead of God saying, I'm going to blast their minds free of all doubt, I'm going to make you such a powerful and eloquent speaker that they will never have any doubts. They'll believe everything you have. You'll be able to sell ice to the indigenous people of Alaska. You can't call them Eskimos anymore. I can't remember. Inuit is, I think, is what they call them. Let me, before we go too much further on this, say hi to everybody. Hi, Nell. Hi, Dar. And hi, Robin. Glad you ladies are with us. And maybe, at least in a couple of cases, there's a gentleman there with you. Who knows? We're glad you're here. Better not be a gentleman with Robin, though. Huh? Yes, Ray. Yes, Ray.
You mentioned it, but you didn't dwell on it very long. To me, it sounds like the doubt is really about his own ability. You mentioned the lack of eloquence, the slow speech, slow tongue. I can relate to that.
Well, maybe his eloquence, his perceived lack of eloquence, is simply a self-perception, much as perhaps your self-perception of a lack of eloquence exists, that you're a lot more eloquent than you think, and with God with you, you're all as eloquent as you could ever really need to be, because he'll take care of that. It's possible. He's already come up, though, with other excuses as well. It's just one thing. And the main thing I want to point out with all these excuses, it's coming to an end, isn't it? God is about done entertaining them. But God has not at one time said, Moses, that's stupid. Moses, you don't have to worry about that. He addresses and honors every concern Moses has. He doesn't just gloss over them. He doesn't ignore them and say, well, because I said so. And that's a fallback with something, as parents, I think it's a weapon of last resort that sometimes you have to go to, because otherwise they'll just keep asking questions. But it's not something God likes to do, at least not in this dealings with this guy who's going to be his friend. He's going to speak to him as a friend, as a man speaks to his friend. And when a friend speaks to you about doubt, sometimes maybe even then you have to say, shut up, Bert, the boat will be fine. It won't sink. We fixed it from last time. It's not going down this time. Whatever, let's go fishing. But in this interchange between God and Moses raises all of these concerns, and God honors each one. He doesn't dismiss them. He doesn't say this can't happen. He's saying, here's my plan for these things. He does get mad at him twice in chapter 4. So, your best buddy can get on your nerves sometimes, I guess, too. So, this is Moses getting on God's last nerve. But it's a doubt not in what God can do, perhaps in the response the message will bring in the people he's sent to bring it to, the intended audience. He doesn't know how that will, and it's a doubt that God, to some extent, shares. And God says, I may have to do 3 different signs to overcome their doubts. And 2 of those signs closely parallel 2 of the plagues that God visits upon Egypt. He turns the Nile into blood, and he sends them boils. Now you say that's not leprosy, boils on leprosy. Well, we've talked about this at times past. You may not believe me, but that's fine. You don't have to. But the actual affliction of leprosy had not made its way into this part of the world yet. It didn't come into what we call the Near East until Alexander the Great came back from India, and his men brought it. It was already in India, but it wasn't here. What they called leprosy was a myriad of skin afflictions. Could be anything. Could be boils. And because there's all these things in the law about what happens when you get over them. Well, not very many people get over real leprosy back then on their own. But they can heal from the heartbreak of psoriasis. And I make fun of it. I really shouldn't. It's evidently for some people a pretty bad affliction, and they have it for years and years, maybe their whole lives. So I'll try to quit making it's just the old commercial, about the heartbreak of the term heartbreak just always seemed a little excessive, but perhaps it's not. Perhaps it's fitting. But God shares to some extent the uncertainty of how Israel is going to react to the calling they receive. And Ed talked about this a little bit, but Moses' life up to this point is something of a parallel to the actual experience Israel will have. To being welcomed into the bosom of Egypt the way Israel was originally. And then anger. Pharaoh's house becomes angry with Moses. Moses is pushed away, really, flees Egypt, and brought to the place. Now, there's a lot of other things, and the way you can look about it here and there. But why is Pharaoh's anger at Moses? Because of the death of an Egyptian. Guess what's going to happen when Israel leaves? A whole lot of dead Egyptians are left behind. So, these are parallels. Moses is paralleling. And as Ed talked about, the sign of the bush is also the sign of this is where, when you come out, you'll worship right here. That's the real sign. It's still a promise. You're going to come right back here. So all of these doubts, and I kind of think about this, all of these doubts that Moses is expressing is not in God's power or ability. It's not based in a lack of knowledge or faith in God. It's a lack of faith or knowledge in Israel, the people, or I think more properly, it's just he doesn't want to do it. What's that?
I'd pass on that.
You wouldn't want to do it either, I guess you're saying. He just doesn't want to. It's not a lack of belief, it's a lack of willingness.
That's a pretty big job.
It is a big job. It's a dangerous job. You're taking on the most powerful. Which one of us wants to go to Washington, D.C. and talk to Pharaoh there and tell him something that he doesn't want to hear? Not just this Pharaoh, but any of those Pharaohs. We've had 46 Pharaohs now. Who wants to tell any of those Pharaohs how the cow ate the cabbage? Nobody. So it is a scary job. I want you to know, Moses is a prophet. Can you think of another prophet who didn't want to do what God wanted him to do, not because he didn't believe God could do it, because he simply didn't want to do it?
Yeah, I was thinking Jonah didn't want God to do it.
Well, we can talk. We're going to unpack that a little bit. What was Jonah called to do? Big picture. Don't worry about all the details. Big picture. What? Preach to Nineveh. Preach to, and this is maybe a detail, but Nineveh, the Assyrians, their biggest, baddest enemy they ever had. The most evil empire that ever opposed them. Worse than Babylon by far. Worse than Egypt by far. The Assyrians were the most cruel empire of that time. Everybody was scared of the Assyrians. Nobody wanted to mess with them. Go to Nineveh, Jonah. And what's the message that Jonah is to carry? Get right with God, or he's going to destroy you, or the Lord is going to destroy you. The message is the Lord is going to destroy you, right? Jonah's message is not one of repent and get right. Jonah's message is God is going to bring you down. Why wouldn't someone who hates the Assyrians, is scared to death of the Assyrians, knows God, though, why wouldn't they want to deliver that message? Isn't that the best news? You would think that's happy news for Israel. It's happy news for all these other people. God's going to bring them down. Because Jonah does know God. Because I knew, God, that you are a forgiving God. And if they repent, you will forgive them. And what does Nineveh do when they hear the message of Jonah? Which is not good news. But from God, it's always good news. They repent. Now, ultimately, they fall and get destroyed and all that. But at that time, they repent. And Jonah is furious. And that's how the book closes. With Jonah sitting there under his dead plant, angry. God explains it a little bit. This is a great city with a lot of cattle, too. This is a lot of stuff. And, you know. But Jonah doesn't say, oh, hell, you're right. It's a wonderful, happy ending. That's not the ending of Jonah. If you're looking at that story and you're looking for a bad guy, the bad guy is Jonah. He doesn't want to obey God. He wants to see his oppressors suffer. He doesn't want to preach to them because he knows they'll repent and he knows God will forgive them. And he denies the Assyrians, he would deny the Assyrians what Israel absolutely had to have. A forgiving relationship with God. They absolutely depend upon it. It's the only reason they exist as a nation. If God doesn't forgive them, they're gone. He doesn't want Nineveh to have it. He would deny them what he and his people absolutely have to have. And that's how the story ends. Now, we can read into it later on after God's explanation. Noah's heart melts, or Jonah's heart melts, and he's so happy. And that's not in the book. That is not in the text. I don't even think it's a fair inference. I think we leave sitting there angry. Maybe years later, when he perhaps is writing the book of Jonah, he looks back on it and puts himself as the bad guy, saying, I had something to learn. Not really about God, but about my fellow humans, even the ones I despise. I had to learn to not just love my neighbor and hate my enemy. I had to love my enemy, pray for my enemy, bless my enemy, do good to those who persecute us. But that's maybe. That's a hopeful way of looking at it, but it's not textual, perhaps. So here's Moses being sent back to Egypt. Maybe he looks at that whole situation. He's got it pretty good. Him and Zipporah. Got a couple of kids. Nice house, some sheep. Why do I want all those Jews coming up here messing everything up? They didn't stand up for me when I stood up for them. What did the Hebrews say to me after I murdered the Egyptian? Thank you, Moses, for intervening and saving the life of one of our people. No. Are you going to kill me the way you killed the Egyptian? And what did the ladies tell their father, tell Jethro, when he helped them? An Egyptian helped us. So Moses, as it's been pointed out, has difficulty on both sides of the equation down there. You may want to stay out of it completely. He evidently does want to stay out of it completely. He keeps coming up with these excuses, not because he doesn't believe God can defeat Pharaoh. His doubts are couched in terms that Israel may not respond well. And that is really borne out. That is a justified, not just they're moaning and complaining while the plagues are going on, but what happens when they get out of Egypt finally. Are they happy campers for 40 years in the wilderness? Do they trust God for 40 years in the wilderness?
Well, even before the 40 years.
The reason they spent 40 years in the wilderness.
Yes.
Instead of God saying, I will turn this car around right now and take you home. He says, they keep saying, are we there yet? He's going to say, you're going to stay here for 40 years. All the times we were driving through West Texas when I was a kid. Are we there yet? We were too far to turn around and go back home at that point. I knew Dad wasn't going to do that. I will pull this car over. Now that was a legitimate threat. The side of the road, no problem for Dad. So parents in Texas can do pretty much what they want, and I think that endures to this day. But that's it's an interesting when we look at Moses and even John. When we look at these biblical stories, the ones we hand children for the most part. How do we start people out in the Bible? With these Old Testament stories. When we read the story of Jonah, what do we focus on? Was it a fish or was it a whale? How did he stand there for 3 days? All of that. Does it really matter? It's like the least important point of the whole story. There's everything else that happens in Jonah is more important than what kind of creature he was inside for 3 days and how he stayed alive for 3 days. I know some creatures have very slow digestion, but getting into all these scientific things, that's the thing that we kind of latch on to. We try to figure out, but it's really like the least important thing. I've heard of people saying, some member of the church is like Jonah. We got to get rid of him. And a lot of times it's directed at the preacher. He must be like Jonah. We got to get rid of him. You read the story of Jonah. Do those sailors want to throw him off the boat? They are terrified. The last thing they want to do is throw anybody in. They want everybody to get home. It's Jonah that says, throw me into the water. This new nickname for the NFL team in Washington, the Commanders. I was texting a friend of mine back and forth, and he thought, well, maybe people will go back and rewatch that great movie, Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World. And it's a problematic from our social justice situation, just as the Washington football team's old nickname was problematic. That movie is also problematic from a sense. I really like it. And one of the characters in the movie, they start to think everybody else on the boat thinks he's a Jonah. They think he's got to go overboard to save the rest of them. And he believes it. And he grabs a cannonball, grabs it in his holds it in his bosom, and jumps overboard. So that cannonball will pull him down to his death. And in the movie, the wind picks up the next day and they're able to sail again. But that's it's taking these stories, how we treat them. And I know with kids, you can't get into all the nuances. I've had made grown men angry looking at these stories, and they're so mad. They get mad at me. Maybe they have a right to. Maybe I didn't put it very delicately or whatever. But I think some of it is they have their own preconceived notions of what these stories say that are completely wrong. And they've had them for decades. And then something like scales can fall from their eyes. It had to happen for me too. The conventional way of American Christians looking at these stories, a lot of times is not really what the stories say. We are rounding off the sharp edges. We are making it comfortable, making it fit into a lot of times what we have to teach our kids about right and wrong, and that's fine up to a point. Imagine hearing the story of Jonah, of how the oppressed person is sent to his oppressors, ultimately to facilitate the rehabilitation of the oppressors while they continue to oppress. Imagine how that story resonates with people who feel like they are oppressed. I'm not going to put too fine a point on it tonight. But sometimes our unwillingness to obey God is not because we don't believe what God can do. Sometimes it's fear of how it will be received. Sometimes it's because we don't want it to resonate for whatever reason. Maybe because it challenges what we believe and what we want, what our agenda is. And sometimes it's because we hate our enemies. Sometimes we feel like we are following a God of the Old Testament with hellfire and brimstone, not a God hanging on a cross, forgiving the people who put him up there while they are killing him, praying for them while they are killing him. That doesn't sound like a lot of fun, does it? What does the Bible say? What in here shows Moses' doubt of God? I don't think anything. I don't think anything in here shows Moses fearing that God can't actually do this. He is concerned about the reception he'll get. He's not really showing a lot of fear about his own well-being. He just really doesn't want to go. We can try to parse that motivation and say, well, why wouldn't he want to go? Well, why do people not want to do what God tells them to do all the time anyway? They just don't want to do it. I mean, that's a lack of willingness is the reason for, disobedience to God most of the time. I want to do something else. And as a rule, if you don't want to obey him, God is fine. If you don't want to be in a covenant relationship with me, you don't have to be in a covenant relationship with me. That's not the deal with Israel, though, is it? The people that enter into the covenant with God don't go into the promised land. They're not worthy. It's their children who are bound to the covenant, not by choice, not because they have decided to follow Yahweh. What? No. Because their parents decided to follow Yahweh. And all of the subsequent generations are bound in that covenant and held to that standard and required to keep those commandments because of what their ancestors chose. So this is a very different way. People want to plug and play the Old Testament into our current context. I think we absolutely have to study the Old Testament. I think it's absolutely essential. I think the gospel of Jesus Christ starts in Genesis and ends at the end of Revelation. I think that's the gospel of Jesus Christ. But to just say we want more Old Testament justice and all that, no, you don't. No, you don't. You haven't read it yet. That's what you think. It sounds good sometimes. But then when you get in there and you look at it, and all of a sudden, all the rocks you're wanting to throw at somebody else, they're going to come zipping right back at you too. And we have decided to follow. It's been our choice to enter into a covenant relationship with God. But it wasn't all of the Old Testament. And Moses doesn't really have a lot of choice here, does he? God doesn't say, well, Moses, if you really don't want to do it, Moses, I guess I'll respect that and I'll just go find somebody. I'll do what you have said. Send whomever you will. God said, I am going to send whomever I will, and that is you. The calling that Moses is receiving is not optional. It's not safe. We're not going to get into it tonight, but one of the very next stories, God comes to kill Moses. It is, and this is something we don't like to talk about, and maybe it's overstated in other circles sometimes, but when you come before God, you are becoming before the most powerful being in existence. We've talked about revering it. This is holy land. You got to take your shoes off. You got to, whatever it is. God's appearance requires human reaction, response. It is not all pancakes and maple syrup with God. It is a dangerous place to be, because God will not tolerate sin. We're not there because we're sinless. We're there because we have faith in Jesus Christ. He is our safe haven, our shelter, why we can approach the throne of God with confidence. Not because we have gotten rid of every problem we have, we've resolved every problem we've had. We are slow of speech, so we took some speech classes. Because Jesus justifies us, because Jesus puts us, we have his righteousness before God, not our own. Okay. We'll come back and talk about this a little bit more next week, especially verses 10 through 13. Moses' last objection, we'll look at it a little more closely, particularly, I think, verse 11, when God talks about who has made man's mouth, who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind. Think about this. I don't want to get into it tonight, but we'll think about this. When they come to Jesus, it says, who sinned that this man was born blind? Him or his parents? And we always say, well, that doesn't understand suffering. That's not the way it works. What does God say here? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? This Bible is easy stuff, isn't it? Okay. Mr. Kelso, you lead us in a closing prayer, please.